Rani was born into a tribal family, the youngest daughter in a small village with few resources. Television, newspapers, and basic amenities were unheard of. The village had only a school up to grade 10, and her family made a modest living, working as day laborers in rice fields, or rolling biddies, handmade cigarettes. Although most village families didn't bother sending their children to school, Rani was one of the lucky few. Her parents were motivated, not by dreams of education, but by the small scholarship amount provided for tribal children. Her schooling continued, and when Rani passed her 10th grade board exams, her father felt a sense of pride, though he hadn't planned any future for her beyond basic schooling. With a modest school 4 kilometers away, Rani continued to study, walking back and forth when they couldn't afford the small fare for public transport. Rani developed an interest in the arts, dreaming of becoming a lawyer. She'd seen lawyers on TV in black coats and imagined herself standing confidently, representing those who needed a voice. This dream gave her the motivation to keep going. But then, unexpectedly, a marriage proposal arrived. The proposal was from a prominent family, well-educated, and of high status. Her father was astonished. Why would such a wealthy, educated family propose to us, simple laborers? Without questioning further or investigating the family, he accepted the proposal, certain that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. When Rani expressed her hesitation about marriage, especially with her dream of becoming a lawyer, her father dismissed her concerns. He said, "Proposals like this don't come every day, especially from such a well-respected family." Even her future father-in-law chimed in, saying, "We recently lost our daughter, and she too had dreamed of studying law. We want to fulfill her dream through Rani." Hearing this, her father felt reassured. They didn't have the means to send Rani to law school themselves, so he saw this as a rare opportunity for her future. Without consulting her further, Rani's engagement was arranged the very next day. Her father didn't even visit the groom's family to check the living conditions or meet the family properly. For Rani, this engagement was crushing. She had dreams of wearing a black lawyer's robe, arguing cases, and standing tall in a courtroom. She tried to reason with her father, saying she wasn't ready for marriage, but no one listened. Her engagement was finalized without her consent. A month later, Rani's wedding took place. At only 16, she barely understood what marriage meant. India's legal marriage age for girls is 21, yet in many rural areas, child marriages persist, especially in regions like Rajasthan. As she bid farewell to her family, she wept bitterly, feeling as though she was being sent to prison. Her father, who she believed would protect her dreams, was sending her away to a life she didn't want. She was shocked by the household rules. Written in bold letters on the kitchen wall were instructions: clean the area first, then cook. Unsure, she assumed these were old rules for hired help and got to work, completing all the tasks asked of her. Her innocence and eagerness to please made her overlook many red flags. That evening, her in-laws introduced her to a set of harsh rules. 1. She was forbidden from sitting at the dining table with the family. 2. She couldn't watch television. 3. She wasn't allowed to laugh out loud. 4. She had to keep her head down and hands folded behind her back while speaking. Even her meals were regulated. She was to eat last, only if there was food left. That night, when she finally sat down, there was no food left for her. Following the rules, she went to bed hungry. Later that night, her husband returned home and immediately began yelling, questioning her about why she hadn't cleaned his grandmother's bed. Before she could respond, he slapped her twice, then dragged her to the second floor. Confused and frightened, Rani followed him upstairs, where she found an elderly woman lying bedridden in soiled sheets. Her husband yelled, "You're supposed to clean grandmother's bed daily, understood?" Terrified, Rani nodded and set to work cleaning her grandmother-in-law's soiled bed. After an hour, she returned to the bedroom exhausted, only to find her husband waiting for her. Without asking how she was or whether she had eaten, he forced himself on her, ignoring her tears and pleas. To him, Rani's feelings were irrelevant. She was simply there to serve him. Rani's marriage had turned out to be nothing like the promises made by her father-in-law. She had dreamed of becoming a lawyer, but those hopes were shattered as she found herself trapped in a life that felt worse than prison. Her daily routine was grueling: cook breakfast, clean the entire house, tend to her grandmother-in-law's needs, prepare lunch, wash endless piles of laundry, iron clothes, and finally cook dinner. In her own family home, Rani was used to helping with household chores, but she had been given food, rest, and peace. Here, in her in-laws' house, she was treated more like a servant. She wasn't even guaranteed food. If there was nothing left after the family had eaten, she would go hungry. And the one thing that was never in short supply? The physical abuse from her husband. He would hit her often, without explanation, leaving her to wonder what she had done wrong. Rani was too afraid to question him. Desperation forced her to find small ways to survive. When she cooked, she would secretly make 2 extra pieces of bread and hide them in her undergarments, sneaking into the bathroom to eat them later. Her life felt even worse than prison, and with no one willing to help, she saw no escape. She wished someone would take her back to her parents' home, but nobody cared to listen. One day, unexpectedly, her father visited. Seeing him, Rani broke down in tears, all her hidden pain rising to the surface. Her husband had beaten her just that morning, but her in-laws wouldn't let her speak to her father alone. Finally, she managed to whisper, pleading with him to take her home. Her father was reluctant, but when she insisted, he finally said, "Fine, be ready. I'll take you home when I come back from work." For Rani, those words felt like a promise of rebirth. She dreamed of escaping her current life and returning to her family. For the first time since her wedding, she felt joy. She imagined the freedom of going home, no longer having to work like a servant. But by nightfall, her joy turned to despair. Her father didn't return for her. That night, Rani felt a deep sting of betrayal, realizing that no one would save her. Her hope of escape had vanished, and she accepted that this miserable life was her fate. She fell into deeper despair, her mental state worsening each day. Her husband, who spent most nights away with other women, would return only to vent his frustrations on her. He showed no mercy, often leaving bruises on her face. Rani's mental health deteriorated, and dark thoughts started haunting her. What if I just put rat poison in their food and end this suffering? But she hesitated, fearing the consequences and the police. Gradually, her health began to fail. For days, she continued working, despite being unwell, to avoid more beatings. Eventually, her condition worsened, and she asked her sister-in-law, a medical student, for medicine. But her sister-in-law ignored her request, delaying for days. By the time she finally gave Rani some medication, it was too late. Rani collapsed shortly after taking it, slipping into unconsciousness. When Rani opened her eyes, she found herself lying in a bed at a government hospital, alone. She had been there for days without any family or support. The doctors informed her that she'd suffered a reaction to some unknown medication and, to her shock, told her she was pregnant. Her body had grown weak, with her weight dropping to a mere 36 kilos. Just months ago, before her marriage, she had been a healthy 55 kilos. In desperation, she asked the son of a fellow patient to write a letter to her father, explaining her situation. Days passed, and still no one from her in-laws' family came to check on her. Finally, on the 5th day, her father arrived and took her back to her parental home. Once back, Rani poured her heart out to her family, explaining all the abuse and hardships she had suffered. She told her father that she didn't want to return to her in-laws. But her father insisted, "Daughter, you can stay here until they call you back. But when they do, you'll have to return. After all, married women belong with their husbands, not at their parents' house." Her family urged her to give it time, believing that things would improve once she had a child. Realizing her father would not support her decision to stay, Rani eventually went back to her in-laws, holding on to the hope that her situation might improve after her child was born. As her pregnancy progressed, she received no special care or nutrition. She managed only by eating raw vegetables like carrots and cucumbers. When she could not re-record, her mother sent her some dried fruits and ghee to nourish her. But even in her condition, she was forced to do all the household chores. Finally, Rani gave birth to a son. However, nothing changed in her household. Her husband's beatings continued, leaving her with no peace or comfort. When her son was about 10 months old, her husband came home drunk one night and subjected her to brutal abuse, burning her skin with cigarettes, pulling her hair, and hitting her repeatedly. Broken and exhausted, Rani made up her mind to end her life. She fed her child, put him to sleep, and tied a rope to the ceiling fan. But in her rush, she forgot to lock the door. Just then, her husband walked in, saw her preparing to hang herself, and, shockingly, did nothing. He merely closed the door and left, as though her life meant nothing to him. At that moment, Rani had an epiphany. Why am I ending my life for a man who doesn't care? Why should I leave my son in the hands of someone so cruel? She untied the rope, determined to live for herself and her child. Rani gathered her belongings, took her son, and went to her friend Sheila's home. Sheila had been a domestic worker at Rani's in-laws' house before her marriage, and the two had become friends. Sheila welcomed her and gave her a place to stay. Rani began working alongside Sheila, earning a modest income of about 1,000 rupees per month, which she used to cover essentials, including food, milk, and her son's needs. Wanting to improve her situation, Rani asked Sheila to help her find more work, and she resumed her studies, eventually passing her 12th grade exams and enrolling in college. Despite occasional visits from her husband, who would assault her or forcefully impose himself, Rani continued to push forward. Soon, she became pregnant again, and this time, Sheila was there to support her through the pregnancy. Rani gave birth to a daughter, and her mother even came from the village to help, filling their small space with warmth and support. With her mother's help, Rani had more time for work and studies. She started doing cleaning work at a beauty salon, learning beauty skills on the side. Within 3 months, she'd gained enough skill to work as an assistant, earning a small salary that helped support her family. Although money was still tight, Rani's perseverance paid off when she graduated with honors, a significant achievement given the hardships she'd endured. Her success inspired everyone who knew her, and she found renewed encouragement. It was then that someone told her about a newspaper called Employment News, which listed job opportunities. Rani began reading it regularly and soon saw a job posting for a police inspector position in the Rajasthan Police. The salary caught her attention. She could finally build a secure future for her children. She decided to prepare for the exam, not knowing that becoming a police inspector would bring her both respect and authority. For Rani, it was about financial security for her children. Living in Sheila's small house, Rani often studied on a cot set up outside on the street. One day, her mother called her inside to feed her baby. When Rani returned, she found that a street dog had urinated on her study books. Her heart sank, as replacing the book would cost 400 rupees, an amount she didn't have. Undeterred, she cleaned the book and set it in the sun to dry, determined to keep studying. It was the pleasant weather of December, and the chill in the air was delightful. The atmosphere was filled with the spirit of Christmas. Every evening, Santa would come singing with groups of children, distributing chocolates and reminding everyone of the festive season. Rani used to make a Christmas tree every year in her village with the neighborhood children. Each evening, the village kids, wearing Santa hats, would go around the entire village clanging plates, engrossed in welcoming Christmas. Outside the church, the villagers would sit around a bonfire, and the children's parade would end there. Whatever food the villagers had, they would share it with the kids. This tradition continued until Christmas. However, after her marriage, Rani never got the chance to celebrate Christmas at her in-laws' house. Now, having left her husband's home, she was completely free and could make a Christmas tree, but her exams loomed ahead. Her paper was on the 27th of December, and today was the 24th, leaving only 2 days for preparation. Any negligence could lead to trouble. On this day, Santa's parade was more vibrant and lively than usual. Despite her desire to watch it, Rani stayed absorbed in her books. Her mother and Sheila stood outside, enjoying the stunts performed by the passing parade. Night came, and a new day began. It was Christmas. The air was filled with joy and excitement. Everyone wore new clothes, visiting each other's homes. But Rani remained immersed in her studies. By the afternoon, Sheila and her mother took the children to the church. Rani also planned to go, but she decided to attend during the prayer time. For now, she stayed at home, diligently preparing for her exam. Rani's life had taken a turn she had never imagined. On Christmas Eve, while the world outside was filled with joy, music, and celebration, her home became a battlefield of unimaginable humiliation and cruelty. Her estranged husband, seizing the opportunity of her solitude, entered uninvited. His intentions were clear, and his actions brutal. He assaulted her physically, forcing himself upon her, extinguishing whatever light of hope still flickered within her. Rani neither resisted nor cried. She endured in silence, clinging to the faint hope that his violence would be over quickly and he would leave. However, his cruelty didn't end with the physical abuse. In a final act of inhuman degradation, he urinated into a bucket and poured it over her, leaving her drenched in humiliation before walking out as if he had accomplished something great on the festival. Leaving her drenched in humiliation. The festive spirit of Christmas, so alive outside her home, was extinguished within these walls. Her estranged husband walked out, as if his despicable act had been some twisted triumph, leaving Rani shattered and humiliated. Yet, this was not the end of Rani's story. Her journey is one of courage, resilience, and unyielding determination in the face of unimaginable odds. Despite the shock, Rani found strength in her resolve. She had a purpose. She cleaned herself up, put on Sheila's loose-fitting clothes since she had none of her own, and went to church in her way to examination center and asked the God why he chose this life for her. She will later go for police exam. Where there's a will, there's a way. 3 months later, the results were announced. Rani ranked third in her entire district. Soon, she passed her interview, completed police training, and officially joined duty as a police inspector. She was granted government housing, where she moved with Sheila, who now left her domestic work to live with Rani. One evening, Rani's husband showed up at her home unexpectedly, assaulted her again, and demanded she buy him a motorcycle. In that moment, she forgot her position as an inspector. The deeply traumatized version of Rani reappeared, and out of fear, she arranged for a financed bullet motorcycle for him the very next day. The following day at work, her face betrayed her distress, and DSP Shekhawat, her supervisor, noticed. Concerned, he asked what was wrong, and Rani broke down, sharing her situation with him. Furious, he reminded her, "You're an inspector. You're supposed to uphold the law, not let anyone degrade you this way." She responded, "I've been silent out of shame, fearing what people might say." Shekhawat spoke to her gently but firmly, encouraging her to take a stand. "If he shows up again, call me immediately," he instructed. Only 3 days later, Rani's husband returned, barging into the home and instructing Sheila to take the children outside. Rani immediately sensed his intentions and called Shekhawat. As her husband attempted to abuse her again and beat her when she resisted, police officers arrived within minutes. They stormed in and apprehended him, ensuring he would never harm her again. Watching him face the consequences of his actions brought Rani immense relief, as if all the years of pain and abuse had finally been avenged. Soon after, Rani filed for divorce, and the court awarded her full custody of her children. Reflecting on her journey, Rani often thought, "If only I had taken this step sooner, I could have spared myself so much suffering." This story is not shared to recount Rani's hardships alone but to empower other women, urging them not to endure abuse in silence. Too many remain silent, fearing what people might say, but no one will rescue you if you don't stand up for yourself. Her message to women everywhere: don't wait for someone else to save you. Find your strength, take action, and let go of the fear of what people will say. Remember, even God helps those who help themselves. Imagine being trapped in a life of daily torment, beaten down and humiliated by those who promised to protect you. From the darkest corners of her life, Rani rose up, determined not just to survive but to reclaim her life and her dignity. She went on to become a respected police inspector, a symbol of strength and resilience. Today, Rani's story is not just about enduring pain, it's about finding courage to break free.